filmconnectors.ca.
The St. John's International Women's Film Festival is based in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. We respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has been lost forever and can never be recovered. We also acknowledge the island of Uktamguk, Newfoundland, as the unceded, traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. We acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Nitassinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatuavut. We recognize all First Peoples who were here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First People have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Women's Film Festival. I'm Johanna Schneller. I write a column in the Globe and Mail, and I'm so thrilled to be here today with Kari Skoglund, brilliant director. Hey, Kari, congratulations.
Hello. Thank you
Really
very
nice
much. Thank you for the kind words.
So you're at the top of your game now. We just saw your reel. When you look back at your career like that, did you have a sense that you were building it, or did it feel like you had any control, or did it feel like sort of random bits of luck and timing and grit?
Well, probably all of the above. I have been in the business since I was 18. So I go back to the days of, first of all, the days of film. I actually started in film where we actually had, and we spliced things together, and I've really seen a lovely circle of it coming around into the digital space and how that's grown on the technical side. On the professional side, being a female director in any kind of narrative, well, anywhere, was just, you could count us on one hand internationally. So in Toronto, I started in commercials, where I was this weird anomaly, and I eventually got the, I guess I'm kind of bossy, and so I got known for doing beer. Like, I started doing these beer commercials which no female, I don't think even today, has ever done, which is a dubious honor, but it sort of catapulted me into having, running crews and what this world where women weren't allowed, it was very much a closed door, sort of how to muscle my way in. And some of it was just last man standing. I had to take the body blows. And, we've talked about that a lot in the last little while, because I've just recently had a project shut down through the Me Too, because one of the characters the project was based on, people came out with allegations that there had been some misconduct, sexual misconduct in their past. And this was from the era where I started in the business, like in the 80s. So it was very poignant for me to really think back as to what, in me coming up through the exact same minefields, we sidestepped a lot, and we accepted a lot. I mean, it was very interesting doing the Roger Ailes of it, because similarly, I was channeling some of my own experiences into that project, where it was set in the 90s, and what we withstood and had to kind of just turn the other way or not hear, we would just pretend not to hear. And that happened as recently as even 4 or 5 years ago. I was on a project where some inappropriate stuff went down, and the woman who reported it was fired. And it was just before that Me Too movement, because I think of the Me Too movement as that we've gone through this a couple of times back in the 80s. Anyway, that sort of answers your questions, but not really. The point is, I never said no. I took anything that came in the door. I looked at everything as an opportunity, because I was just thrilled to have a job. And I think the other thing that kept me standing, in part, weirdly, was probably being female. I would get, in the television space, I'd get all the middle shows. They're called the bottle shows and whatever. You'd get the middle show, because if you mess that up, they could fix it. You get 5 or 6. And so if you got through that, and somehow I think I always managed to just try to elevate the material, whatever I was working on. And if I could elevate it, I got another job. But that didn't mean, weirdly, elevating it also means you're often ticking people off. Somewhere in there, you're going to piss somebody off because you're not, towing the line, or you're trying something different, or so it can have its, it can backfire. But that's sort of how I stayed alive through all that. And what was, I think, in the moments, the luck moments that happen, where you foster your relationships with people that you've been working with over the years, or, the other thing is to reach out to try to work on new materials, or with new people. Don't stay in the same circle, because you want to, you want to expand your horizons to groups that are going to move at different paces. So you get a call from someone who you worked on this project. They were, Joe Blodgett doing nothing, and then they're show running or whatever 2 years later, and you have a relationship with them. So I think it's important that you, or at least that was my strategy, was to keep mixing it up. So I had this body of work that I just was very lucky to be, some of it very muscular, some of it very dramatic, some of it which was true of my commercial work too. I was doing cars and beer, and yet also doing, I don't know, commercials with kids, Oreo cookies commercials, and, things that were soft and gentle. So I think you bring everything you've done, you bring your bag of tricks to your next project. So it's important to keep, keep the doors open to new ideas and new genres that you maybe haven't explored before, to see what you can bring to it. And then you end up with this really interesting body of work. Now, I lost 3, in doing that, I went through 3 agents. I was at WME, I think 3 times. I got fired there a couple of times. ICM, I think, fired me at one point, and CAA definitely fired me at one point. So, and that was because they were like, Kari, first of all, you're a woman over 40, and you've got such this broad spectrum of work. I don't know. We don't know how to sell you. But I kept working somehow. Phone kept ringing. And then I got with a team who is really, in the last 10 years, managed to figure out who I am and actually embrace the fact that I can do, the Borgias and the Vikings, and also do a family drama, or whatever. And that's been the game changer, I think. The right team, I think, ultimately is the game changer.
That's so interesting. It's crazy to me that being able to do everything makes you less appealing to certain agents. Like I would think that being able to have wide-ranging tastes would help you as a director. But would you say within that there is a Kari Skogland trademark? Like, are there things that that you put in, even if the wide world doesn't know that's a thing? Is there something that you always like to make sure?
I think, yeah, I would say, in part because I came out of editing, I started as an editor. I probably, in terms of just the actual technical I shouldn't say technical, more creative way I come at a scene, or I come at a shot, or I come at holistically at the show I'm doing, is I really, and I learned a lot from working with people like Neil Jordan, to dissect what a scene is about and really get into the DNA of what that is, which might be about a pencil, actually. There's a whole bunch of dialogue, but it's about the pencil. And so trying to cinematically embrace what that is, so that I'm not just pointing the camera and shooting, that the camera is a character in the room, and and is capturing the emotions in a way that that give it some kind of an edge, or some kind of a slightly different look, so that I'm not doing traditional coverage, and I'm not sort of coming at it from a traditional headspace. So that, becomes a combination of looking at it holistically, and then looking at it in the minutia. And then the other thing I think might be a trademark. I don't know, it would have to come from other people, but first of all, I do actually direct the actors, which I know a lot of. It's quite funny how many directors don't actually go in there and talk to the actors in a meaningful way. So character and that can sometimes get a little bit left behind, particularly on episodic, when you're a director who's coming in, one after the other. Definitely there's a mistrust on the part of the actors. So you have to gain their trust, but because the new face, new deal, like whatever. But I try to bring out their best. And I think the other signature would be not just bringing out their best and garnering their trust by doing that, but recognizing I'm there to support them. Actually, we're all there to support them, because at the end of the day, they're on the screen, and it's not my show. Or movie, actually, it's their movie. So trying to make a space that is safe, and where they can excel, and where they can make mistakes, or I can make mistakes. I keep saying to everyone, if it sucks, it won't be in the movie. So let's try it. So I'm a bit playful on set, and I like to experiment. And I think that comes out in the footage, because I've been told by people, oh yeah, we can tell when it's you. Like if I do a pilot and then it switches to another director, they say, oh, we can tell it's you. And I'm thinking, how can they do that? But maybe it's, 7 different ways of approaching it, cinematically, intellectually, and so on, that maybe defines the work that, comes out of but by the way, I am often not in control of the final edit. I'm never in control of the final edit. So what I provide to the editing room and what gets out there is often, skewed a certain way too. So, and sometimes for the better. I mean, I can say that there's been plenty of times when I feel like a really great editors come in and found footage and moments that I either, forgot were there, or didn't know that, they find the gems that I missed while shooting, and they bring it to the fore. And so I can be happily surprised by the fact that I'm not fully in charge. And I can also be absolutely devastated when I see what the final is, because particularly in television, there's many agendas. And so they're not always aligned with what you've what you feel, what the big art that you feel you've done to it.
Right. Where did I go?
Where did I go? Where did my little signature go? Oh, well.
So one thing that, so I think that everybody out there probably has a very good concept of what a working actor is, but I think maybe they have a less of an idea of what like a working director is. So I think we're sort of getting at this notion that, you know, as you say yes to things because you want to work. But do you have a sense that you're in control of ultimately what you're putting out in the world? Like, are there things that you would say no to if you didn't like
Yeah.
I don't know, the theme of the piece or
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I regularly say no. Now fortunately, I'm in the position where I can say no. There was plenty of my career where, you know, I couldn't say no because I had to make a living. And so I went into some genres and explored things that I didn't necessarily love. I still tried to, you know, they still become your baby and you do the best you can with them. But now I would avoid certain things, certain genres, because I have to live in that space. And I have to live, you know, I have to live with the characters, and I have to make the character, you know, particularly if you're in a serial killer space, I got to be in there with them in the muck. And I don't like to live in that space. So, you know, now I'm a bit more careful about, and I think also, you know, people say, do what you know and love, which of course is an easy, sort of an easy path and a lane to choose. But sometimes I have found it very interesting to do what I didn't know I know and love, you know, to explore. And so I'll say yes to something because it's got something in it, particularly if it got political agendas or a certain kind of drama to it that I haven't done before. Then I want to go in there and you know, try my hand at being in there with the performances and the you know, the DNA of the piece, to see what I can bring to the party and what I can experience as a result of it. So
can you give us an example of that, of a place where you've recently sort of pushed yourself into new territory?
Let me think. Well, I guess Nosferatu in a way, which was a show with Zach Quinto. And it was a combination of kind of horror, elevated horror and family drama. And I'd done some horror, like early on for Miramax, a little movie. And I, you know, it wasn't my thing particularly, but this was different because it had the horror element, but it also had family drama. And so this combination of otherworldliness, I really loved. And so, you know, it was a, I'm just forgetting, Joe Hill book. And so it, you know, it had great drama in it because he's a fantastic writer, and the horror was, you know, just twisted enough that it gets really weird. Now, so that would be one, and I just loved it. I just had a great time with it.
Well, I watched The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, of course, gigantic Marvel project, superheroes, you know, and what I loved in the pilot is we get this big Marvel intro, dun, 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 with all the characters and stuff. And then your very first shot is ironing, super quiet, almost like an indie film. And I wonder if that was in your control. Like, are you able to sort of, like, is that one of your signatures that you sort of thwart expectations a little bit sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, and that was all us, just, you know, in terms of I have a tendency to shoot a lot of stuff for the editing room because I know that's where you get to redirect your work, right? Because you can shift stuff around. And so I did this opening montage, which wasn't the same as originally written. We did go through an editing process where we, you know, we thought about things differently and we came at it a bit differently. But essentially, it was the deconstruction of the shield, which represented the American flag. And so what was this new, the guy that was going to carry the American flag, what was that going to look like? And how could we say there's blood on this shield, there's blood on this flag, so we want to reinvent it. And that's what, the idea was, it goes into the museum because it's no longer relevant. And so anyway, to is part of that deconstruction was also deconstructing a superhero, right? And so what is that? And then throw at that sort of domestic duty, which is not terribly, considered a masculine norm. It's not under, it doesn't tick the box under this is what a guy does.
A man ironing his own
A man
shirt.
ironing his shirt. So that's part of the, I guess, what I look for, the unexpected, and I try to push myself to think of that. And sometimes, by the way, and plenty of times, it's on set. So you're sitting there, you go, oh, that'd be a great idea. Let's do it.
So you're open to discovering stuff in the moment. You don't have everything like rigidly storyboarded.
Absolutely. And actually, in the Marvel world of it, even when I board stuff, I'd still be looking for opportunities, and they're much more, that's what we're doing, is don't stray. But I do find that even when you come in super rigid and saying, okay, this is what we're doing, this is the tunnel I'm in. I am very excited every time that breaks apart and I find something fresh. I feel like it's all about being prepared and then being able to completely toss that, because if you're that prepared, you will not abandon the meaning of the scene or the core of the scene, or the storyline, or it's in there. You're not, you're so prepared that whatever you do is going to somehow relate to that. You're not going to do such a hard left that you toss it all out. So I try to embrace the idea that I walk in and I never look at my shot list. I do it. I hand it to people, whatever, and then I never look at it. I shouldn't say that. I never say never. Occasionally I have, but I tend to go, it's somewhere in there, and then I let the set and the actors and the props and the situation, because once you're in there and you've got cameras, whatever, now it's real, right? And you can go with the flow. So I try to channel that feeling for everybody, because then if you're on a path of discovery with everybody together, including the actors, they don't feel, and here's one that's kind of a detail, but whenever I can, and it makes cinematographers crazy, no marks on the floor, no marks. Now that is a thing not everybody, in the public knows that, every actor walks in and they hit a mark and they stand there, and that's where they're perfectly lit and the sound is, perfectly. And, but every actor, no matter how trained they are, looks to find that mark. And then, that they always do a little glance somewhere in their trajectory.
Wow.
And it means that they've fallen out of the scene for just a beat.
Right.
So I started this whole thing of no marks. And sometimes I get beaten up over it, and I have to kind of, all right, we'll put a mark down. But by day 3 of it, the actors are loving it, because they're finding their space and they own the space. And then they're not thinking about, because I say to them, hey, you can feel the light in your eye, just hit them and you've got it, right?
Yeah,
and
you do what you need to do, and I will be there.
Exactly. We'll be there. We'll find it. We'll catch it,
That's amazing.
and that allows the actors to, I think, just on their technical side, not have to be as aware of what is, their technical side is always part of what they have to do, but this just takes a layer of specificity out of it that allows them to own it in a physical space. So that might be also why the actors feel a little more comfortable with me. Like their whole body language relaxes as a result. And then you're in a character scene that flows.
Right. I was struck by how much character work is in, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. There really is a buddy story of friendship and family and all of that. But there are a hell of a lot of fight scenes, Kari. And I wonder if you have a secret to fight scenes? Because you make them very lucid, but do you have like any kind of rules or any kind of template or goals?
Well, in that case, one of our goals was no guns. So there's very little gun action. You'll notice we did have the occasional one, but by comparison to other superhero or action pictures. So that was one rule that we started out with, or that I imposed, and Kevin Feige was very much behind it. The other thing that I do with fight scenes is they have to have a story within the fight itself, an emotional story. So you've got your plot story. This guy's got to win. This guy's got to die. This guy's got to whatever. But then there's got to be. I try to find the emotional story, and then in the case of something like that was a 6-part mini, but even within a movie, you've got, call it 6 big set pieces or 6 action pieces. So I try to get the story of the whole of it. So action 1 to action 6 also has a sort of overarching story. And then, so then I could break it down within that. And then each one of them, I like them to have their signature core idea. So like one might be, in the case of Falcon Winter Soldier, for example, in one case we were in Prague, and we were in this sort of old, it looked like an old, psychiatric ward that had been abandoned. So I said, we're making a horror film. Let's make this a horror film. And so the action took on, that sort of idea. And another one was, I can't remember them all now, but we had these trucks, and and it was my idea to put them on the top of the trucks. And I think it was the writer's idea, and he said, "But Kari, are you okay if we do that?" And I endorsed it. I was like, "Oh yeah, let's put them." Oh my gosh!
They're also racing down a highway. They're not just like
Oh yeah. And then I said, "Oh, let's have them on a highway, and let's do that." And that was a very tough sequence to pull off for all kinds of reasons you can imagine. So there are times when, you want to push the envelope and you just go, I want to shoot myself now. Now that we've gone this far.
So that's a Marvel budget. I assume it's bigger than some of the budgets that you've had. Does more fun, like does more money come with more fun, more headaches, more all of it? What does it feel like to have sort of resources that feel unlimited-ish?
You never have enough, weirdly, whether it's 5 million or 150 million or 10 million. For some reason, the box always seems to be pushing at needing more. So that becomes a universal norm. And so because when you go in with a $5 million budget, you kind of know the box you're in, and so you're working with that box, and then of course things come up or whatever. So it actually is oddly the same. A lot more trucks, a lot more people on set, obviously. And what is fun about working in the bigger budget space is that you can, having, sort of been cynical and saying there's never enough, you do have a lot. So you're able to do some stuff that simply is not available to you at a lower budget range. And so that's fun, back to exploring and pushing the envelope and trying new things. So what I hadn't done before was superhero action where you're using, people fly.
Yeah, there's a lot of aerial
wire work, and so, and I hadn't worked with some of the specificity of what the Marvel look is, or the and that's why they wanted me to do it, by the way, was because I was coming in and sort of mixing it up a little bit and not going in the traditional fare, even though it ultimately had to look, and does look like it's coming from the same Marvel world, MCU world. But so I loved finding out about that. And once you've gone through that and learned about it, it can be applied to many things. So, I think I graduated from the School of Marvel with a whole new set of tools.
You have a degree in, well, they fly. So.
Oh, and a degree in all kinds of other stuff too. They have to take punches that are, superhero punches. So it's like,
Oh
what is
yeah.
that, right?
Yeah, the sound of the wings that come out of the falcon, the click sound of the wings, like I just love all that stuff. So you've also worked on Handmaid's Tale. I'm just looking for things
Yes,
that
which
everybody
of course
else
couldn't be
there will
more diametrically opposed, right?
more diametrically opposed.
That's back
So-
to having that muscle, right? Where you can do both.
I wonder if there were kind of standout moments or something that you particularly remember from working on Handmaids, like a challenge you had to overcome, or a scene that made you feel successful, that you were glad you put out into the world. Is there anything that stands out from working there?
First of all, working with Lizzie Moss was, and the whole team was extraordinary. She taught me an awful lot, just not only how she works, but how she thinks, and what she brings to a scene, how she breaks down a scene for her, what she does within it. And I would say, well, the first thing, which is sort of off topic slightly, but I had come from doing The Punisher. So I was in New York doing this very muscular, testosterone vigilante type show in New York. And off of that, Trump was elected as I was finishing that show and coming into Handmaid. So I came into Handmaid completely, with this very different narrative. And we were saying that what was happening. And we suddenly realized this is something very special, because life is imitating art here, or art's imitating life. I don't know. It's happening. It seemed like it was happening in the moment. So that sort of informed literally how I was dealing with the scenes that we were dealing with in the finale of season 1, which is where I came in, because I was informed by reality of what was going on in my world. And so it was not, suddenly it was real. And so I remember there was one scene before I came back for season 2 and did a bunch of episodes in that season, but we were doing a shot where we came down the stairs, and it was kind of a oneer. And so to choreograph it with stairs and, people having to do certain stuff, and it having to be very present and in the moment and kind of scary, because it started out, it was written to be very kind of stiff back. And I said, oh no, I think we have to turn it into this. And everybody got on board, and it took us a few hours to figure out how to get it all in the can. But it was a super challenging moment of where it all annexed, and she was taken away in a van as someone who had broken the rules, and it seemed to imitate exactly what was going on in the world. And I think that I suddenly realized the intellectual challenge of what this show was going to mean. So that wasn't so much a physical challenge, but we met, it became it was a combination of serving the intellectual side with this physical challenge of having cameras run up and down stairs, with people having to, dance with the camera and move around. And we pulled that off.
Wow.
So that was one. Another one in Handmaid would have been, we had this big scene in a funeral. I had to do a funeral scene, which was in the snow. And so all the girls come down and they wind their way around, and then there was a ritual. And one of the things that I had put into another one of them, and I can't remember which episode, was this kind of ritualized circle, sort of Celtic kind of quality. And everyone seemed to love the ritual of, the callback to feminine rituals. And I remember I called down, I sort of came up with this idea, and it was like, we were shooting the scene. I was like, oh, I need 12 ribbons because we're going to do a sort of a not, I had in Vikings, I had done this Celtic, or I guess it was a Viking, but Celtic and Viking start to merge at some point. A knot ceremony and a marriage thing. So I kind of got this epiphany, got to do that here. And so I called down to the wardrobe and props department. Oh my God, I need 15 ribbons in 5 minutes that are 15 inches long, and they're like, what? Corey, if you mind. But they were all very ambidextrous at serving these sort of last minute epiphanies. The craziest one, I was doing the Borgias, and it was a beautiful set, big, sort of massive hallway, and there was Jeremy Irons. And I realized, what this is about is his loneliness, and I didn't see that until I saw him in this moment, and then I remembered that I had been in one of these big halls, and there was a bird, and this little bird couldn't get out, and so had died. And I said, hey, I've got this idea. What if you find a bird that's, you've got to set free? And he was like, oh, that's a good idea. Let's do that. So I said, okay, where do I get a bird? I called the props department, and I'm like, so you wouldn't have a bird, would you? It could be a dead one, because we can make it a dead bird. He's very sad about this dead bird, or it can be a live bird. But, I know the animal trainers are not here, and that's going to be a whole deal. Anyway, they came up with a bird. He said, weirdly, Kari, I have a bird in my freezer. And I said, you really have a bird in your freezer? He said, no, I really do. I found this bird. So anyway, we had the bird.
That's incredible. Wow. So when you're shooting, scenes that are tough, scenes that are about loneliness, or, in the case of Loudest Voice, scenes that are about, the systemic abuse of women by men in the workplace. Do you allow yourself to get emotional, or do you have
to?
Yeah. And
if I'm crying at the monitors,
sorry?
If I'm crying at the monitors, then I know my heart check is on. Right? Yeah. I definitely get emotional.
Yeah. Was there a particular scene that got to you that you remember in any one of the things you did? In all of them, there was, I remember in Handmaid's Tale, one of them that was surprisingly emotional. In that funeral scene, Ann Dowd has to stand in the center, and so she started out with the standard, I am the slightly evil matron of this group. And I looked at it and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm missing something. Wait a second. No, this is, so I said to her, Anne, what if you, in this moment, we feel your pain, that you've lost one of your own. Let's think about this for a second. And so she thought about it, and she said, yeah, you're right. Yes, let's switch it, that I'm in pain, not in anger. And oh my God, I'm at the monitors. She's up there weeping. I'm weeping at the monitors as she's naming off these names of women who died. And that was one moment. Another moment was, there was a moment with a baby dying. And I remember just being destroyed by this baby that was ultimately lives, but in the moment we thought was dying. And so, yeah, I think there's been many over the years where I walk up to the actor, like, oh my God, that was so great. And they think I've lost my mind. Oh, I bet they love it. Okay, let's go back a little bit in your life. What kind of a kid were you?
What kind of a kid? Well, I think I was always a bit of a leader, which just means bossy at some level. But I think I was always a little bit ahead of myself, age-wise and maturity. I had like many families, we had some very tough times. And so I had to survive those alongside my mother and my brother, and my father. And my mother was a teacher or became a teacher. Actually, she was a stay-at-home mom in the early days, thinking that was going to be what she should do for a living, is be a mom. And then when the marriage fell apart due to mental illness, my father suffered mental illness, which at the time was a taboo subject, and there was no real, in Canada, there was no real support for families or mental illness as a whole. It was just not recognized, particularly in Quebec. And in Quebec, there was no rights for a woman. So she had to face what that was as a mother, that you had to have the husband sign everything, and the husband wasn't there. And so she had to face that. So I came up with, as she became kind of emancipated, and she had to re-educate herself because she had trained to be a dietitian, but she had 2 kids, and so retrained herself to be a teacher, so she would have holidays sort of similar to in the cycle of being a parent, because there were no single parents. In my school, there was no other mother who was a single mother. Now, 4 years later, divorce became the norm, and it was happening left, right, and center. But at the time, so I think that shaped my sense of independence. That and I tell my daughters, and I tell any woman that I meet, never, always rely on your own income. Always rely on yourself. It's great to share. It's great to share, but don't ever drink that Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And that I might be fiercely independent as a result of seeing someone struggle through. But and it's by no means gender, accusing a gender, or it's just saying, I think we all have to never feel dependent and never be dependent, because it informs your life very differently if you are.
Yeah, absolutely. At what point did
that was my therapy session for the day.
No, it's really, I think it's really important to say those things. Again, this is the Women's Film Festival. So I think all of this stuff, I think women don't talk about money nearly enough. But when did you realize that you had a yearning for an artistic life?
I probably always did without, but okay, so I remember the moment very clearly. I was maybe 11 or 12, and we snuck into a theater to see Ryan's Daughter. And I watched this movie, and I was so blown away by the themes of it, and the cinema of it, and the performances. Sadly, it doesn't hold up today in the same way that it did then, because the pacing and the nature of the filmmaking has been so-called modernized, I guess. So it doesn't, because I recently watched it, I thought, oh, it's still such a great picture, but it probably wouldn't speak to a modern audience quite the same way as it spoke to me. And I didn't know anything about, what it was to be a filmmaker, so-called, but I said, I want to do that. I don't know what part of it. I don't know whether it's call myself a producer or a director or a writer or whatever, but I want to do that. And so I early on knew where I was headed, which meant that by the time I was 18, I was, that was when I got my first job in film and in the editorial department, and started to learn to edit. So I came in that way.
So what was the very first thing you directed?
The very first thing I directed was a music video for a band whose name escapes me at the moment. It was a band from down east, and I had my own editorial company at that point, And anyway, I was asked to join this music video company. In those days, you know, you had a lot of freedom and it wasn't all performance. You did these little movies. And so I remember, I mean, everything that could go wrong went wrong. You know, I mean, there was a big star who pulled up in the middle of one of our shots. It was like 4 a.m. And he pulled up and the window rolled down. And it was like this big music star now whose name is escaping me at the moment. I never saw him. I just saw the look on the 80s face. He was like, I think it was James Brown. And he said, "My God, that's James Brown. Is James Brown in that car?" And he was looking for drugs, but and he drove up. We were shooting on Yonge Street in Dundas. Anyway, it worked out really well. And you know, as these things are, you know, it rained and I remember seeing, again, it was like 2 a.m. on Yonge Street, and a bus goes through our shot because, of course, we didn't have any lockup. We didn't have any of the stuff that you do. Bus pulls up and a guy gets off, and he's got a dog, like a little bull terrier or something, walking with a raincoat on and a set of sunglasses. And I'm like, it's 2 a.m. on Yonge Street. I guess that's what happens. So anyway, that was the first one, and it ended up doing very well for me. And then the next thing I did was a commercial. I think I did some music videos in between, Frozen Ghost and people like that. But then and the Spoons, I remember all those people. And then I did a commercial for Dentyne. It was one of the first commercials for cinema, and we shot it in Australia. And by then, I guess I was starting my career was launched. So it started.
And in the back of your head, were you always headed toward features, or were you just happy to be? Okay. So then when you found yourself on the set of your first feature, did you let yourself say, "I'm a director now"? Like, were you able to feel it? Because it's one of those, you know, that great line about directing is that you have to say you're a director before you actually directed anything. Like, you have to have the faith.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. I told my daughter this, who has just directed her second feature. She's 24. So she went to Ryerson, and I said, you know, so here's the deal. And she was like 22. I said, "You're a director or you're not. Just call yourself a director and then start to direct stuff." So it does mean you've got to put your own money into things. There's a lot of sweat equity, because nobody else is going to call you a director unless you've directed something. So how do you do that? So it's, you know, that's the sort of crawl your way to the top part of it, because there's no defined way in. You can, you know, you can make shorts, you can do things on your iPhone. You got to figure out how to, you can say you're a director, but then who else is going to support that you're a director, and how does that work? So winning awards is important on shorts, or in my case, I won a lot of awards doing commercials. So then I was asked to come in and do an MTV show, because it needed kind of a hip commercial edge to it. And I think I called myself a director at that, I would say somewhere around there, because it was like going to boot camp. I had 6 characters in the room at all. It was called Catwalk. It was a show about a band. And we had to do 3 music video. We'd block shoot, and any folks who are working directors will know how nutty this was. We would do 3 shows in 3 weeks. So 5-day shoots, 3 music videos, and we'd block shoot it. That's how, you know, we could pull it off. And 6 characters in the room pretty much all the time. Rarely did we get a 200. So you've got to, you know, that's just time consuming. So the time that we had to make the show and what the show had to be were diametrically opposed. But we did it. And so I came out of that thinking, and what I did was I thought, okay, I don't know how we're going to get through what this is. So I looked at a lot of soap operas, because I thought, you know, they do like 28-page days, because I was doing obviously 10 and 11, 12-page days. And everybody was telling me about it, because I was a newbie. Everyone was saying, "Oh yeah, no, this is how the business works. This is what it is." I was like, really? 12 pages a day? It's a lot, right?
That is a lot. It
Of course,
remains a lot.
it's
Yeah.
impossible. But we did it. And, so I looked at the soap operas and thought, okay, but it informed my coverage very differently too, because then but it looked very, very avant-garde and actually I was just channeling how to bring the camera, the actors to the camera, how to block things so that you didn't have to do coverage. They would somehow turn and look over a shoulder and say their line or whatever. I would find ways to get stuff on camera. Anyway.
Suddenly soap operas look very, very hip. So, you have a lot of projects upcoming, but there's always downtime for a working director. How do you keep the faith? Like, how do you stay sort of strong between projects, or do you?
Well, it's been very interesting because after Falcon and Winter Soldier, I wanted to take a breather. I'd worked just nonstop for, really 15, 20 years. I'm very disciplined about my work day. I get up and hit my desk and write. And I think I'm probably always hustling at some point, some point in the day about a project or chasing a project or whatever. But after Falcon and Winter Soldier, I wanted to take a beat and really see what the universe was going to offer up. And so I looked at a number of projects, some of which I didn't get, some of which I got. One of them being Cleopatra, of course, which is a dream come true. I did some writing. I wrote a script for Sony. I wrote a script for Amazon, which helped with my sort of writing muscles to say, yeah, I'm an auteur, because one of my features, one of my more successful features was I wrote and directed and produced it. And so I do love to write, and that really, so I just explored for the last couple of years. So with this most recent project that I was on that I don't know whether we've talked about, but it was a project where it was a feature. Matthew McConaughey was playing a coach. Caitlin Dever was playing the daughter, and it was a very feminist project that I was very excited about doing, and we had to shut it down because there were some allegations against the guy that was based on. And that has sparked a lot of thought and interest in my mind to explore where we are at in telling those stories, because they're very gray zone. And I did grow up, as we talked about earlier, I grew up in the 80s, so I know what that looked like. And it is interesting to look at it now from the DNA of the 2022, or the lens of 2022. And it's easy to judge from this lens, but it's not so clear in the times. So I'd like to, when these things happen, I kind of feel like they happen for a reason. And what door is that, as this door closes, what door is that opening for the stories that you want to tell in the future? I have a number of political stories based on a book that I've loved forever called The Prisoner of Tehran. And I'm hoping to bring that, which is essentially the Iran-Contra affair, and which is, again, part of the 80s, right, where there was lots we can look at now and have a sense of what does that story mean to us today,
right? And
what can we touch on that at the time we couldn't talk about it, but now we can. So I think the doors that I'm now looking at are, I get very excited about true stories and authentic stories. They don't have to be factual, but as long as they're authentic. And so I'm using this downtime, and most recent downtime, I was, it just happened in the last couple of weeks, to really explore maybe some new lanes that I haven't been down before. So it's, I think, potentially very exciting. And of course, Cleopatra will happen next year, and that's also a feminist story. at its core, that explores the life of a woman whose history was told by the men who were her enemies. So there's lots in there to talk, to explore that we haven't seen before.
For
So
those
that,
for those who don't know, can you say who your Cleopatra is?
oh yeah, Gal Gadot.
Gal Gadot. So Wonder Woman becomes Cleopatra. That's very exciting. So now we come to the very exciting award portion of this award. The Visionary Award comes with a cash prize that the winner, Kari, gets to select to pay it forward toward her next project. So Kari, who's your winner this year?
Naila Inukshuk.
Ooh.
Yes, who did a wonderful film called Slashback, and I think it was charming and super well put together. And in particular, what I was struck with was her direction of these kids, because they're young teens, and it's just so extraordinarily natural and fun to watch. And the setting is cinematic, so it sort of ticked all the boxes.
Yeah, I agree. I saw the film and I could just tell it must have been some heck of a directorial challenge, because in the conditions where she shot, it was not easy. And I think she pulled it off brilliantly. So Naila, come
Turn on
on
your
in.
camera.
Come on in and accept your prize.
Hello.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you, Kari. Thank you so much, both of you, for the kind words about Slashback. It was definitely an adventure to make the movie, but it's so great to finally be able to share it with audiences and share our weird little movie. So I'm so glad to be able to talk to the girls later and let them know that people are still watching it and getting a kick out of it.
Fantastic.
Congratulations.
I have to ask you quickly, what is your next project?
Yeah, thank you so much. And really kind of getting any support towards the next thing is just like a reminder that, oh yeah, this is real. I can do this as a job now. and so I really do appreciate it. I've got a psychological thriller that I've written with my co-writer Ryan Cavan. Very different than Slashback, but it's a lot of fun, really scary, and I can't wait to get started.
Terrific. I look forward to meeting you in person.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that we probably have to go in a couple of minutes. We've kept the audience, and you've been fascinating, Kara. It's been so great to talk to you. But I would love to know, as sort of the last question, what your work gives you. I mean, we've talked a lot about what you give to your work, but what do you think it gives back to you, or what do you think keeps you in it?
I really enjoy, I think the sort of moments of elation, and there's plenty of moments of real down, so the moments of elation have to counter the tough moments. When myself and the team that I'm working with, when I'm looking at a scene and we've brought it to life, we've had essentially a blank canvas, or we've got the words on the page only, and it's a flat page, and we're there, and the scene has come to life, and we're experiencing, it's experiential in the sense that we feel the truth and honesty of this moment that we're in amongst the actors, and all the crew is standing there with their, the props guy has his props ready, and the sound person has everyone's doing their thing, and we all get this wonderful electricity that this could not happen without us. That we're the reason for every element, every person in that room is instrumental to making it, to telling this story. And so that goes back to then the importance of the story. So I look because for that moment of elation to really count, I have learned by polishing enough turds that if you choose the right story, that moment of elation, you realize you're bringing you're, sort of channeling the spirits, and you're bringing something to life that needs to be told and wants to be told. And you're sniffing around in arenas that maybe are either difficult to watch, but honest, or illuminating in some way, telling the story, feminist story, telling the story of women, telling the story of men, and so on. So that's where I get I think, the give back.
Is there a dream project out there? Is there a thing that you would really, really love to be able to do?
I have a couple. One of them, I would love to tell the story of the Opium Wars, which is, I don't know, many people don't know the story of the Opium Wars, but we did not behave well, and we brought down an empire because we were drug dealers back in the 1800s as white people, and we infiltrated China in the most heinous of ways. And I'd love to tell that story. I would love to tell the story of it's a story of a courtesan written by I'm having a brain fart because I've rewritten it, and it's Camilla of the Flowers, which is Camilla des Fleurs in French, but Andre Dumas. And wrote the novel, and loosely based a script on that. And I would love to tell that story because it's also telling the story of the times, but telling about freedom and pursuit of love, really. So I think it's very timely, even though it's period. I love period. So, and the other one that I'm dying to tell is William the Bastard, very muscular story, which is the story of the Battle of Hastings, everything that goes into the Battle of Hastings, which is very Game of Thrones-ish, but true.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so I got a few.
Well, I believe
that was my slate, by the way. So
I believe in putting stuff out into the universe, right? So you put it out there and somebody's going to pick it up. Well, thank you for giving us so many moments of elation today, Kari. It was really, really fantastic to talk to you. And thanks so much to the audience. And it was just fantastic. Thank you.